The mansion stood tall on the hill, a stunning architectural piece surrounded by lush green lawns and a steel gate that represented both security and pride. It wasn't just a house, it was the result of years of sacrifice, hard work, and relentless discipline. The man who owned it, Marcus Johnson, wasn't just wealthy. He was a decorated former special operations officer who had spent much of his adult life serving his country in silence. Now retired, he had chosen this neighborhood for peace, privacy, and a fresh start. But peace was the last thing he would find here. The local homeowners association had a reputation. They were strict, nosy, and often targeted people they didn't approve of. From the very beginning, Marcus noticed the subtle ways in which the board made his life more complicated than it needed to be. His architectural plans had been delayed, his landscaping choices criticized, and his driveway questioned, even though it met every guideline. Still, Marcus paid his dues, followed the rules, and avoided confrontation. He wasn't the type to get rattled easily. But everything changed on a warm afternoon when he returned home to find the front gate locked, not from inside, but by the HOA itself. The keypad had been disabled, and a bright red notice was slapped across the entry. The message was blunt: access restricted, violations pending. Marcus stood there, stunned at first, before anger crept in. They hadn't just fined him, hadn't just written a letter. This time, they had physically barred him from entering his own property. His name was on the deed, his money had paid for every brick and beam, and yet a group of self-important neighbors had decided he wasn't allowed inside. Word spread quickly through the cul-de-sac. Some residents peeked from behind curtains, eager for drama. A few whispered among themselves, knowing the board had gone too far. Yet others seemed pleased, almost smug, as if keeping Marcus out was a victory for them. They didn't see the man behind the uniform, the sacrifices behind the medals. All they saw was someone they didn't think belonged. Marcus dialed the number listed on the notice, demanding an explanation. The HOA president's voice carried arrogance and condescension. She claimed Marcus had failed to comply with aesthetic standards regarding his property, citing his security cameras and reinforced fencing as militaristic and disruptive to neighborhood harmony. When Marcus reminded her that his designs had been approved, she dismissed him coldly. Until the board votes otherwise, you will not be allowed to access your property. That was the moment Marcus realized this wasn't about guidelines. It was about power. And the board had chosen the wrong man to push. Within minutes, Marcus sent out a message, not to lawyers, not to local officials, but to the people he trusted most, his old special ops brothers. They weren't just comrades. They were family. Over the years, they had promised one another that if one called, the others would come. That bond didn't expire with retirement. One by one, sleek black SUVs began rolling into the neighborhood. The sound of heavy tires on the pavement turned heads as former soldiers, men who carried themselves with quiet authority, stepped out. These weren't just friends. They were professionals who had led missions across the globe, men trained to stay calm under fire and handle situations with precision. The HOA board, gathered on the sidewalk with smug expressions, watched as Marcus greeted his crew with firm handshakes and nods. Their presence was intimidating without being loud. No one shouted, no one made threats. But the air shifted. The power dynamic flipped instantly. The same neighbors who had whispered behind curtains now opened their doors slightly wider, sensing they were about to witness something unforgettable. Marcus and his crew approached the locked gate. With a simple inspection, one of them pointed out how the keypad had been tampered with and rigged shut. Illegal entry restriction, he muttered. Another photographed the notice and the damage for evidence. They weren't here to break down the gate or cause chaos. They were here to document, prepare, and dismantle the HOA's arrogance in a way no one could dispute. The HOA president tried to reassert control, stepping forward with a false sense of confidence. She began reciting bylaws, her voice cracking as she noticed the cameras recording her every word. Marcus didn't argue with her. Instead, he calmly stated, "You're trespassing on my rights as a homeowner and a citizen. You've illegally restricted access to property I own outright. This ends today. His words were steady, sharp, and undeniable. One of his friends, a former intelligence officer, was already drafting a report for legal channels. Another had contacted the county sheriff's office, forwarding the pictures and recordings. Within the hour, law enforcement would arrive, not to side with the HOA, but to enforce the law they had broken. But what truly broke the board's facade wasn't the law or the presence of the special ops crew. It was the silence. The men didn't yell, didn't posture, didn't need to prove anything. Their quiet unity, their composed strength, was more terrifying to the board than any display of force. These were men who had seen real battlefields. A gated community's petty power trip didn't rattle them. It only exposed how ridiculous the HOA's actions were. As neighbors gathered around, whispers turned into open conversations. People who had once stayed silent about the HOA's bullying now spoke up, emboldened by Marcus's stand. Stories spilled out about unfair fines, harassment, and intimidation. The board, once feared, now looked cornered. The president stammered excuses, claiming it was a miscommunication, but no one believed her. The truth was laid bare. When the sheriff's deputies finally arrived, the situation was clear. They reviewed the evidence, listened to Marcus's calm testimony, and studied the locked gate. Within minutes, the notice was torn down, the keypad reactivated, and Marcus was allowed inside. The deputies issued warnings to the HOA members, advising them that further actions could lead to lawsuits and even criminal charges. The neighborhood that once questioned Marcus now saw him differently. He wasn't just the man with the mansion on the hill. He was the man who had stood up against abuse, who had refused to be bullied, and who had friends willing to back him up with unwavering loyalty. The HOA, stripped of its illusion of power, began losing credibility fast. Members resigned, meetings were disrupted by angry residents, and soon the entire board collapsed under its own corruption. Marcus didn't gloat. He didn't need to. His victory wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming dignity, setting boundaries, and proving that no amount of arrogance could strip a man of his rights. His mansion, once a target of envy and suspicion, became a symbol of resilience in the community. For Marcus, it was a reminder of the battles he had fought before, the ones overseas and the ones at home. The HOA thought they could lock him out, but in reality, they had unlocked a fight they could never win. And behind him stood a brotherhood that ensured he would never fight alone.